The war had burned across the stars for so long that many believed it would never end. The battles stretched from one system to another, fleets clashed in the void, soldiers marched on alien worlds, and whole generations knew only fighting and fear. So when whispers came of a peace meeting, many called it a lie, others said it was a trick, and yet the whispers grew louder until the whole galaxy listened. The council chamber chosen for the meeting was carved into the heart of a moon of no one's claim, a place of stone and steel, high walls guarded by shields, wide halls filled with banners of every side in the war, and above it all a dome of glass through which the stars could be seen burning cold and endless. It was here the leaders gathered, each arriving with fleets to guard them, each bringing soldiers and weapons to show their power. For no one trusted anyone. When the human diplomat arrived, all expected a grand escort. They expected ships bristling with weapons, squads of warriors, machines of war ready to show strength, but instead there was only one ship, old and plain, no fleet, no guns, no army, and when the doors of the ship opened the diplomat stepped out with only one figure walking behind, a single human bodyguard. At first silence filled the chamber, then whispers began to rise, some laughed, others mocked, some shouted in anger, calling it an insult. To bring only one guard to such a gathering, to stand in front of armies with a single human was madness. Yet the diplomat walked forward calm and certain, and the human bodyguard followed close, silent and watchful, eyes sharp like blades, steps steady and slow. The alien leaders studied the human with suspicion, some with disgust, some with fear, for humans were still young among the stars, a race not yet spread wide like others. Their numbers were small, their fleets not vast, their worlds few, and yet they had a reputation whispered in secret places, a reputation of survivors, fighters, and strange courage that no one could explain. Still no one believed one human could matter in a war this vast. The bodyguard did not speak, did not show fear, did not bow, did not flinch under the stares of thousands. The figure stood tall in plain armor, no heavy weapon, no machine, only a small sidearm at the hip and the strength of the body itself. It was a strange sight among aliens who carried blades of energy, cannons of plasma, armor that gleamed with lights of power. Compared to them the human seemed weak, simple, unimportant, and yet there was something in the way the figure stood that made even the boldest hesitate. As the diplomat began to speak of peace, the leaders listened, but their eyes kept drifting to the bodyguard. Some laughed quietly, some whispered in low voices, mocking the sight, saying that humans must be desperate or foolish. Others leaned closer and wondered if there was some hidden plan, some secret reason why only one was brought, for no leader would risk so much without purpose. No one would insult the others so openly without confidence, and that thought made them uneasy. Among the gathered armies rumors began to spread. Soldiers spoke in hushed voices. Some said the human was not ordinary but a machine in disguise. Others said the human was the last survivor of a deadly war from long ago. Some believed the human was a weapon wrapped in flesh, a monster that could not be stopped, and with every rumor the silence around the figure grew heavier, like a shadow spreading through the hall. The human never moved except to follow the diplomat. The eyes scanned the chamber again and again, watching every corner, every soldier, every hand that twitched near a weapon. The body seemed relaxed, but the muscles held coiled strength like wires pulled tight, ready to strike, and though the aliens did not understand it they felt it, a weight pressing on their nerves, an instinct that told them this single figure was dangerous beyond reason. One alien commander leaned to another and whispered that this was a trick of fear, that humans were weak, that one blow would shatter them, and yet his voice shook as he said it. Another swore that the human eyes glowed with hidden power, though they did not. Another claimed to see scars across the armor, scars that told of battles survived against impossible odds, though no one knew the truth, but the stories grew like fire in dry grass, each word feeding the next, and soon even the boldest began to wonder. Still the leaders could not admit fear, not in front of rivals, so they laughed louder, spoke harsher, their voices sharp as blades, mocking the human, calling the diplomat a fool, asking if humans thought wars could be ended by a single guard, if peace could be held by one set of hands. But behind the laughter their eyes never left the figure, for every movement, every small breath, every shift of stance seemed to promise a storm waiting to break. The diplomat spoke of peace, of ending bloodshed, of building a future together, but no one listened. All thoughts turned to the human, all questions circled back to the same point. Why bring only one? Why stand before armies with a single protector? Why risk death with nothing but human flesh to guard the way? The puzzle cut into every mind, and the longer they looked the less certain they became. The hall grew heavy with tension. The banners above seemed to sway though no wind touched them. The shields around the moon hummed with low power. Soldiers gripped weapons tighter. Commanders whispered to aides, the air thick with doubt, and still the human stood silent, still as stone, unmoving, unbroken, watching, waiting, a single figure against all the gathered might of a galaxy at war. No one wanted to be the first to act, for if the human was nothing then striking would be easy, but if the rumors were true then the first to act might fall in shame before all, so they hesitated, they whispered, they laughed to hide their unease. But the question burned brighter with each passing moment, and in their hearts they all felt the same chill, the same thought they dared not speak. What if this human was enough? What if one was all it took? The diplomat kept speaking of peace, but the real battle was already beginning, not with fleets or armies, not with guns or ships, but with fear, the fear of one human, the fear of what could be hiding behind calm eyes and quiet steps. And though the war had lasted generations, it was in this single moment that the fate of the galaxy began to turn, for sometimes one figure standing still can shake empires. And as the chamber grew darker under the weight of silence, the human lifted their head just slightly, eyes meeting the crowd, and for the first time the galaxy leaders felt it clear. Not rumor, not story, but truth. The human was dangerous, and whatever would come next would change everything. The silence in the chamber could not last forever. The leaders argued, their voices sharp and cutting. Some demanded proof. They wanted to know if the human bodyguard was a true protector or just decoration. Some called it a trick, an insult to the council. Others whispered that the human might be more dangerous than anyone guessed, and so the idea grew, the human must be tested. At first it was whispered only in corners, soldiers sharing quick words, commanders giving sly orders. But then one leader stood and spoke loud enough for all to hear, declaring that no peace could be trusted while questions remained. If the human was meant to guard the diplomat, then the council had the right to see if this human could stand against real danger. The word spread quickly, and soon no one objected, for many were curious. Many wanted to see the human fall, and many simply feared the unknown. The diplomat tried to calm the voices, tried to bring the talk back to peace, but the crowd was already burning with tension. The leaders demanded proof, they demanded a fight, and though the diplomat shook his head and spoke of reason, the human raised one hand slowly, not to strike but to agree. The meaning was clear, the human would accept the test. Guards moved swiftly through the hall, the banners shook as heavy steps echoed, and from behind the chamber walls came figures cloaked in shadow, assassins sent to strike quickly, their blades of energy gleaming faintly in the dim light, their faces hidden, their hands eager. They lunged toward the diplomat with speed like lightning, thinking their victory certain. The human bodyguard moved like a storm breaking, no weapon drawn, only the body itself, each motion sharp and clean. The first assassin struck with a glowing blade, but the human stepped aside, grabbed the wrist, twisted, and sent the weapon clattering to the floor. The second came from behind with a silent leap, but the human turned, struck once with an open hand, and the assassin fell gasping for air. The third tried to stab low, but the human caught the strike between two hands and snapped the blade clean. The fight was over before most eyes could follow. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The assassins lay on the ground alive but broken, not killed yet utterly defeated, their weapons shattered, their bodies trembling, and the diplomat stood untouched, calm as if nothing had happened, while the human bodyguard stood still again, chest rising slow, eyes cold and sharp, as though the fight had never begun. The leaders stared wide, their mocking laughter silenced, their sneers frozen on their faces, and a heavy weight pressed into their minds. One human had just disarmed and destroyed trained killers without drawing blood, without effort, without pause, and the truth struck them like thunder. This was no ordinary guard, this was something far greater. Yet pride and anger did not let them admit fear. One commander rose, his voice booming, claiming that the assassins were weak, unworthy, nothing but shadows unfit to test a real warrior. The words were bold, but his hands shook as he pointed, and he demanded a true trial, not a secret strike but a duel before all eyes, a champion of the council against the human bodyguard, for only then would the truth be seen. The chamber rumbled with approval, soldiers stomped their feet, leaders nodded sharply. The demand was clear, and the diplomat could not stop it. The human did not resist, standing silent as always, eyes locked on the floor until the moment came. Then the human lifted the head and looked directly at the council, a single nod given, and the duel was set. The arena was chosen quickly, a wide circle in the heart of the hall, banners pulled aside, guards forming a wall around, lights blazing down from above, and the crowd pressed close, voices rising in waves of excitement and fear, the air heavy with smoke from torches and machines, the ground marked with scars from past battles, though none had carried the weight of this moment. From the far side entered the alien champion, a giant of muscle and armor, towering twice the height of the human, skin thick and rough like stone, eyes burning with pride and rage. In the champion's hands was a great blade humming with energy, a weapon that had cut down dozens before, and on the champion's chest shone marks of victories past, each a symbol of power. The crowd cheered, the banners shook with noise, soldiers raised fists and weapons, for this champion was loved by many and feared by more. They believed no human could stand against such a monster. They believed the duel would end quickly, that the human would fall broken in the dust, and that the diplomat would be shamed before all. The human bodyguard walked slowly into the circle, no weapon in hand, no shield, only the simple armor and calm steps. The contrast was sharp, one figure heavy and armed with strength, the other light and bare of tools, yet the human did not tremble, did not rush, only walked with quiet steps until both stood face to face, the silence before the storm pressing on every heart. The champion raised the blade high, shouting in a voice that shook the chamber, declaring that this was the end of human pride, that one strike would show the truth. The blade came down fast and heavy, a strike that could shatter stone, but the human moved like water flowing around rock, stepping aside just enough, letting the blade smash into the ground, the echo roaring like thunder. Before the champion could lift the blade again, the human struck once, a hand hitting the champion's chest with speed too fast to follow. The giant stumbled back, surprise flashing in the burning eyes, anger rising hotter, and again the blade swung. Again the human stepped aside, calm as if in a dance, striking once more, the sound sharp and clear. The champion dropped to one knee. Gasps rolled through the crowd, disbelief thick as smoke, yet the fight was not over. The champion roared, lifting with fury, swinging wild and desperate, the blade carving the air in arcs of light. But each strike met only empty space, the human weaving, sliding, moving just enough to avoid, each motion graceful, each step precise, and with each miss the champion grew slower, heavier, weaker, until the human struck once more, a final blow sharp and certain, and the giant fell to the ground, unconscious. The arena went silent, the banners still, the soldiers frozen, no voice dared rise. The champion who had crushed many lay broken in the dust, beaten not by weapons, not by machines, but by one human bodyguard with bare hands and steady steps. The truth was clear, undeniable, and terrifying, for if one human could defeat a monster like this, what could many do? Whispers spread like fire, some claiming the human had hidden power, others saying it was training beyond reason, others simply staring in fear, unable to speak. The leaders looked at each other with pale faces, their pride wounded, their confidence shaken, for they could no longer laugh, they could no longer mock. The proof stood before them. The human bodyguard stood still once again, breathing steady, eyes calm, no boast, no word, only silence, and that silence spoke louder than any voice, for the galaxy now knew a truth it wished not to face, that one human could shift the balance of war, and perhaps the balance of all things. The arena still carried the echo of silence from the fall of the alien champion. The dust had not yet settled, and already the galaxy felt heavier. The leaders shifted uneasily in their seats, their soldiers whispered with trembling voices, and the air itself seemed charged with something too large to name. Everyone had just witnessed the impossible, one human defeating a creature twice the size, armored and armed, and yet the human stood calm as if it had been nothing at all. The whispers spread faster than light. Some claimed it was a trick of the eyes, others swore the human had used hidden weapons too fast to see, a few even believed the champion had been bribed to fall, but deep inside they all knew the truth. They had seen skill beyond reason, speed beyond belief, and strength that no one could explain. The duel had shown them something real, something undeniable, and the fear of it spread like fire across the chamber. One leader rose from his place, his face twisted with anger and pride, his voice booming across the walls, declaring that the fight had been unfair, that the champion had been caught by surprise, that the human victory meant nothing. If there was true power in humanity, then it must be shown again, not against one warrior but against many, for only then would the council believe, only then could peace talks move forward. And with those words the chamber roared with approval and dread. The diplomat shook his head, trying to calm them, speaking of reason, saying that enough proof had been shown, but the voices of the leaders grew louder, pressing harder, demanding more, for they could not allow fear to rule them without trying to break it. They needed to see the human pushed beyond limits, they needed to see the bodyguard bleed, only then could they know if the danger was real or if they had frightened themselves with shadows. The human bodyguard stood silent as always, not moving, not speaking, waiting with calm patience. And when the demand reached its peak the figure raised one hand again, a simple gesture, no words, but the meaning was clear. The human would face whatever came. The chamber fell quiet for a moment, a chill running through the air, and then the order was given. The duel would continue, only this time it would not be one against one. It would be one against many. The floor of the arena shook as gates opened, heavy footsteps echoed, armored warriors marched forward, each one a veteran of countless battles. Their weapons gleamed in the light, their eyes burned with determination. 10 of them stepped into the circle, their bodies towering, their movements sharp and certain. They formed a ring around the human, confident that this would end quickly, confident that no one could stand against them all. The crowd leaned forward, breath held, hearts pounding, for what they were about to see had never been seen before. No one had ever stood alone against so many champions at once. It was madness, it was suicide, and yet the human did not shake, did not falter, only stood in the center with eyes calm and steady, the silence before the storm pressing harder with every second. Then the signal was given and the warriors charged, their weapons flashing, their voices shouting. The sound of steel and energy filled the chamber. The first swung a heavy blade. The human stepped aside, caught the strike on one arm, twisted, and sent the giant flying across the circle. The second came with twin blades cutting in swift arcs. The human ducked low, rolled forward, struck twice with open palms, and the warrior fell gasping to the floor. The third tried to spear forward with a glowing pike, but the human seized the shaft, snapped it clean, and struck the chest of the attacker, sending him crashing to the dust. The fight was chaos, bodies clashing, weapons striking, but the human moved through it all like a shadow, each motion smooth, each strike certain, not a single movement wasted, not a single step uncertain. The human flowed like water, strong and unstoppable. One after another the warriors fell, none killed but all broken, defeated in moments, and the crowd could not believe what their eyes showed them. Some soldiers shouted that it was sorcery, others that it was impossible, but their voices shook with fear, their hearts pounded with dread, for no trick could move with such speed, no illusion could throw giants across the ground, no lie could break weapons with bare hands. The truth was before them. One human had just defeated 10 trained warriors at once, and done so with the ease of a storm breaking against the shore. The leaders shifted in their seats, some pale with shock, some red with fury, their pride bleeding under the weight of fear, for they realized what this meant. If one human could defeat so many alone, what could an army of humans do? What hidden strength had humanity been keeping from the galaxy? What secret war had forged such a protector, and why had no one seen it before now? The diplomats stood silent, watching as the human returned to the center of the arena, standing once again calm and still, chest rising steady, eyes sharp and cold, no boast, no cry of victory, only silence, and that silence was heavier than any roar of triumph, for it told the galaxy that this was not chance, not luck, this was truth. The crowd began to whisper again, louder this time. Some shouted that humanity must be destroyed before it was too late. Others said humanity must be allied with, for no power could be left outside their side, and still others simply stared, unable to speak, unable to think, trapped in the fear of what they had seen. The chamber shook with noise, with anger, with panic. The duel had ended, but the true battle was only beginning. The leaders could no longer laugh, they could no longer mock, their words now trembled, their faces pale. They demanded to know how, they demanded to know why, what gave this human such power, what secret training or hidden weapon had been used, and when no answer came they grew more restless, their pride tearing at their reason, for they could not accept that a single human could defeat what their empires had built over centuries. The human bodyguard did not answer, standing silent as always, waiting, watching, letting the silence burn into their hearts, and the diplomat did not speak either, for words were no longer needed. The proof had been shown, the truth could not be hidden, the galaxy had seen it with their own eyes, and the fear would never fade. And so the duel ended, not with cheers, not with honor, but with trembling silence, with leaders whispering in secret, with soldiers staring in awe, with whispers spreading like poison through every corner of the chamber. The duel had been impossible, and yet it had happened, and the war that had raged for generations now stood on the edge of something new, something greater, something darker, for one human had shaken the galaxy. And though the human returned to stillness, though the champion and warriors lay defeated, though the arena was quiet, in the minds of every leader one question burned brighter than any other. If one human could do this, what would happen if all of humanity rose together? The chamber still shook with the memory of the impossible duel. Warriors lay scattered across the arena, leaders sat in uneasy silence, soldiers whispered in fearful voices, and yet the human bodyguard stood as always, calm and still, no word spoken, no sign of weakness shown. The weight of that silence pressed heavier than any weapon, for all had seen what should never have been possible, and none could forget it. The leaders could not accept it. Their pride would not allow them to believe that one human alone had defeated so many. Their voices rose in anger, demanding answers, demanding truth. They shouted that this must be a trick, that hidden weapons must have been used, that technology unseen must have been concealed in the human's body, for nothing else could explain such strength and such speed. Nothing else could make sense of what their eyes had witnessed. One commander stood tall, his armor shining under the lights, his voice sharp as a blade, declaring that the human must be searched at once, stripped of armor, scanned for machines, tested for implants, for no council could continue while suspicion remained. Others joined quickly, nodding, shouting, the demand spreading like fire until the hall echoed with one voice. The human must reveal what was hidden. The diplomat raised a hand, speaking calm words, warning against such disrespect, reminding them that the gathering was for peace, not for humiliation. Yet the crowd would not listen. The fear was too strong, the whispers too sharp, the demand too loud. They wanted proof, they wanted answers, they wanted to know what secret made one human so dangerous, and nothing else mattered. At last the human stepped forward, slow and steady. The crowd grew silent again, every eye fixed on the figure, the air thick with expectation, and without a word the bodyguard began to remove the plain armor piece by piece, each sound of metal falling to the floor echoing across the chamber like thunder. Beneath was no machine, no glowing weapon, no strange device, only flesh and bone, muscle marked by scars, skin hardened by battles fought long before this day. Scanners were brought forward, machines glowing with light, humming with power. They swept across the human body again and again, searching for wires, for circuits, for hidden strength, but nothing was found. No implants, no chips, no secret tools, only the beating of a human heart strong and steady, only the rhythm of breath calm and sure. The truth was laid bare before all. The human was only human. The hall filled with gasps, disbelief spreading. Leaders leaned forward with wide eyes. Soldiers shook their heads. No one wanted to believe it. Yet the machines did not lie. The proof was clear. This was not a weapon wrapped in flesh, not a trick of technology. This was only a human, and still that truth carried more fear than any weapon ever could. Some leaders whispered that perhaps humanity had been hiding its real power, training warriors in secret, building armies unseen, preparing for the day when they would rise against the galaxy. Others whispered that if one human alone could do this, then entire fleets of humans would be unstoppable. Some shouted that the galaxy must strike first, destroy humanity before it grew too strong, while others begged for alliance, for friendship, for peace, for no power this great should ever become an enemy. The diplomat spoke again, voice calm but heavy, saying that humanity had no secret armies, no hidden weapons, no plan for conquest, that this bodyguard was not a monster but a protector, proof that peace could be held not by numbers but by will, not by fear but by strength of spirit. Yet his words struggled against the tide of fear, for though the leaders heard them, their hearts did not believe. Their eyes could not look away from the human who stood silent, flesh and bone, yet stronger than all they had known. The soldiers muttered in corners, fear rising higher, some refusing to meet the human's gaze, others gripping their weapons tighter though they knew it would mean nothing. Commanders whispered to aides, plotting in shadows, unsure whether to strike or to bow. The chamber no longer felt like a place of peace but a battlefield waiting for the first spark. One wrong word, one wrong step, and the war would ignite again right there in the hall. One fleet commander stood, anger blazing in his eyes, his voice booming, declaring that humanity must not be trusted, that no race could be allowed such strength, that if one bodyguard could bring the galaxy to its knees, then humanity must be destroyed before it was too late. His words cut through the silence, sharp and final, and many nodded quickly, their fear pushing them toward war, not peace. The diplomat tried again to speak of reason, of hope, of unity, but his words fell like stones into a storm, unheard and ignored. The leaders were no longer thinking of peace. They were thinking only of survival, only of fear, only of how to stop what they could not understand, and that fear was sharper than any blade, stronger than any fleet, more dangerous than any weapon, for fear once born cannot be killed so easily. The human bodyguard remained silent, no anger shown, no threat made, only watching, eyes scanning the chamber, hands steady at the sides. Yet that silence itself was a threat to the leaders, for it told them nothing and everything at once. It told them the human did not need to boast, did not need to explain, did not need to prove anything more. The truth was already written in the eyes of every witness. Humanity was dangerous. Humanity was powerful. Humanity was more than they had ever imagined. And so the hall filled with whispers and shouts, with fear and pride, with voices calling for war and voices begging for peace. The truth had been revealed, and yet it brought no comfort, only greater fear. For if the human was only flesh and bone, then there was no way to explain what they had seen, no way to measure it, no way to control it, and what cannot be understood is always feared. The banners above seemed to hang heavier, the walls seemed to close in, the soldiers shifted nervously, hands on weapons, eyes darting. The leaders glared at one another, unsure who to trust, unsure what to believe, and the diplomat stood alone with one human at his side, a single protector who had already shaken the galaxy. And though the war outside still raged, this chamber had become the true battlefield, a battlefield of fear and truth, where one human had revealed more than anyone had expected. The secret was out, the truth was clear. The human bodyguard was not a weapon, not a machine, not a monster made by science. The human was only human, and that was what terrified them most of all. And as the whispers grew louder, as the tension rose higher, the question burned in every mind. If one human alone could do this, what chance did any empire have if humanity chose to rise together? The chamber of the council now felt less like a hall of peace and more like a battlefield waiting to break open. Soldiers gripped their weapons, commanders whispered to aides, leaders stared at one another with eyes sharp as blades, and above it all stood the human bodyguard, silent and still, a figure of flesh and bone yet heavier than any army, a shadow that bent the will of the galaxy without speaking a word. The proof had been revealed. The human was not a machine, not a weapon wrapped in skin, not a trick of hidden power, only human, and yet that truth only deepened the fear. For if this was what one human alone could do, then the question grew louder in every mind. What would happen if all of humanity rose together? What would happen if fleets of humans marched across the stars? The thought was enough to turn every whisper of peace into a cry for war. The diplomat tried to speak again, voice steady though the storm raged. He spoke of reason, of unity, of a future where no child would know war, but his words struck against walls of fear and pride. The leaders no longer listened, their hearts heavy with suspicion, their pride bleeding with shame. Their voices rose to demand that action be taken at once, that fleets prepare to strike, that humanity be crushed before it grew beyond control. One commander shouted loudest, his armor gleaming, his face dark with fury, declaring that peace was dead, that the council was a stage for lies, that war must begin again with greater fire than before. He pointed at the human bodyguard and swore that this figure was proof of humanity's hidden plan, proof that humans were building monsters to take the galaxy by force. His words echoed like thunder, and many leaders nodded quickly, their fear feeding their anger, their pride demanding revenge. The air thickened with danger, soldiers stepped closer, hands on triggers, ships outside the moon aligned their weapons, fleets stirred in orbit, and it seemed certain that the war would begin again right there inside the chamber, one spark away from blood, one breath away from fire, the last fragile chance for peace slipping away into smoke. The human bodyguard moved then, not fast, not violent, but steady and clear, stepping forward between the diplomat and the shouting leaders, standing alone against the storm of voices. The eyes of the figure scanned the hall, sharp and cold, yet calm. A silence spread through the chamber, heavy and deep, and for a moment all sound died, as though even the air waited to see what the human would do. A group of soldiers at the edge of the hall broke that silence, their fear too great to hold. They raised their weapons and charged forward, voices crying out, energy blades glowing, plasma rifles burning. The attack came swift and sudden. The diplomat stood unarmed and helpless, but the human moved faster than thought, faster than light, a blur of flesh and strength. In an instant the soldiers were disarmed, their weapons broken, their bodies thrown aside without death. Only defeat. The attack ended before it had begun. Gasps filled the chamber, fear grew heavier, yet something strange began to bloom as well, for the human had not killed, had not spilled blood, had not struck with hate, only with precision, only with control. Every soldier lay alive though beaten, every weapon lay shattered but silent. The meaning was clear. This power was not only for war, it could also stop war without ending lives, a force not of destruction but of restraint. The leaders stared, some with pale faces, some with eyes wide, and for the first time doubt cut into their fear. If one human could stand before armed soldiers and end the attack without blood, then perhaps the strength they feared was not born for conquest, but for protection. Perhaps the power of humanity was not the blade they thought, but the shield they did not understand. Still many clung to pride. They shouted again, voices shaking now, demanding war, demanding destruction, declaring that humanity must not be trusted. But their words rang weaker, their voices cracked, for the image of the human stopping an army without killing had rooted deep in every mind, and no amount of anger could erase it, no amount of pride could deny what they had just seen. The diplomat stepped forward once more, his voice rising steady and clear. He pointed to the human at his side and asked if the galaxy could not see the truth, asked if they could not see that this was not conquest but proof of another path, that humanity did not bring fleets or armies, did not bring weapons of fire, but brought one protector, one shield, one figure strong enough to stop war without spreading more blood. He asked if this was not the very thing they all claimed to desire, the strength to end fighting without endless death. The chamber shook with silence again. Leaders looked at one another, uncertain. Soldiers lowered their weapons slowly. Fleets outside waited for orders that did not come, and the weight of choice hung heavy in the air. This was the last chance, the final moment, to step toward peace or to fall again into endless war. Every eye turned back to the human, every mind chained to the same truth. This figure held the fate of the galaxy in silence. The bodyguard did not speak, did not move, only stood steady, a living reminder that strength did not always mean death, that power could end battles without destroying all, that one human had done what fleets had failed to do for generations, stopped the war even for a breath of time, and in that silence the leaders felt the truth they had fought to deny. The war could end, it could truly end, if they only chose to let it. But pride is heavy and fear is sharp, and many still clenched their fists, still whispered of betrayal, still dreamed of fleets burning human worlds. The chamber swayed between hope and ruin, each voice like a weight pulling one way or the other, each whisper a spark waiting to fall into fire, and still the human stood, the last chance embodied in one figure, unshaken, unbroken, the storm held in waiting hands. The moment stretched long, too long, until finally one leader lowered his head, his voice quiet but firm, saying that perhaps the diplomat was right, perhaps this human had shown them a different way, perhaps peace was not weakness but strength, and others nodded slowly, uncertain but willing, their voices rising with less anger and more thought, yet others still glared, their eyes filled with hate, unwilling to bow, unwilling to bend, their pride burning even as their fears screamed louder. The chamber became a scale, balanced on the edge of choice, one side pulling toward war, the other toward peace, every word, every glance, every breath tipping it one way and then the other, and all the while the human bodyguard stood silent, the weight of the galaxy resting on shoulders that did not shake. And in that silence the leaders realized something they had not before, that perhaps this was the last chance not only for peace but for themselves, for their worlds, for their fleets, for their people, that if they chose war now it would not be like before, it would not be endless battles of equals, it would be ruin, for one human had shown them what humanity could do, and if they chose wrongly then nothing could save them. And so the chamber waited, every heart pounding, every eye fixed, every voice trapped in silence, waiting for the scale to tip, waiting for the decision that would end everything or begin something new, and still the human bodyguard stood calm and steady, the last chance given shape. The fleets gathered above the moon like storms of fire, millions of ships glowing against the endless black sky, weapons armed, shields raised, captains shouting, soldiers gripping controls with trembling hands. The galaxy had come to the edge of destruction once more, and only one figure now stood between peace and final ruin, the human bodyguard, silent and steady. A shadow beneath the stars that seemed too small to matter, yet carried weight heavier than any fleet. The council chamber shook with cries and whispers, leaders argued, soldiers barked orders, diplomats tried to plead, but the moment was gone, war had returned, the fleets outside opened their channels, their commanders swore they would strike, that humanity would be crushed, that peace was dead, the diplomats begged for one more moment, one more chance, but no ears listened, no heart softened, the choice had already been made. The fire of pride had drowned the fragile spark of reason. The human bodyguard lifted his head slowly, eyes cold as stone, his body still as steel, then he turned without a word and walked to the great window of the chamber, staring into the sky where fleets of every empire waited, weapons glowing like 1,000 suns, engines screaming, warriors chanting, all ready to burn the stars with their rage. The leaders shouted at the human to stand down, shouted that he had no right. But their voices grew weaker, for something in the silence of that figure shook them deeper than any weapon. In the silence the human moved, walking out from the chamber, passing guards who dared not block the way, stepping into the hangar where ships rested, small craft lined like children before giants. The human entered one with ease. No weapon, no army, no fleet, only one body and one vessel. The bay doors opened, and the craft soared into the endless black sky, a single spark rising to face storms of fire. The fleets roared as one, commanders laughed with fury, mocking the arrogance of a lone human daring to face them all. They swore they would end this figure in a breath. They swore their first strike would scatter him into dust. But no order yet was given. They waited curious, angry, proud, yet unwilling to fire first. The silence stretched, 1,000 eyes locked on the lone craft drifting calmly into the center of the gathered fleets. The human sat within, hand steady, heart calm, his eyes scanning the sea of war. He did not speak, he did not threaten, he only moved, and when he moved it was as if the sky itself bent. The small craft spun like lightning, weaving through formations, slipping past shields, gliding between titanic vessels with speed no eye could follow. Within seconds entire squadrons fell into chaos, their systems jammed, their engines dead, their weapons silenced, and not a single life was lost. The commanders screamed in disbelief, ordered fire, ordered pursuit, but the human was too fast, too sharp, too precise. His craft slid through beams of energy, danced between missiles, turned entire barges into nothing, and with every motion more ships fell silent, their systems disabled, their weapons drained, their fleets unraveling like cloth torn by invisible hands. Fear began to spread, whispers filled the channels. The galaxy watching in shock, unable to understand what was happening. It had taken centuries of endless war to build these fleets, decades of blood to fuel them, yet in only minutes one human was turning them to silence, one by one, without fire, without slaughter, without death, only stillness, only silence, and the truth grew clear with every second. This was not a warrior of destruction, this was a force of restraint, a shield against the storm, a figure who fought not to kill but to end the killing. The commanders shouted again, voices cracking now, ordering rams, ordering charges, ordering everything at once, but chaos reigned, their fleets tangled, their systems broken, their weapons dead. The human moved too fast, too perfect, his craft became a shadow impossible to strike, a ghost no beam could touch, a storm no shield could stop. Within only 1 minute half the fleets were already silent, drifting powerless, their lights fading like dying stars. Panic grew, fear spread, pride collapsed, soldiers begged for retreat, officers wept at their controls, leaders in the chamber screamed into their channels demanding answers, demanding order, but there was none. The war they had sworn to begin was being ended before it had even started, not in fire, not in ruin, but in silence, in 3 minutes that felt like eternity. The human pressed forward, the second minute burned, and now even the mightiest flagships fell quiet, their great cannons useless, their proud banners dim, their endless power nothing before the precision of one human. The galaxy trembled at the sight. Every leader watching from the chamber sat frozen, their voices gone, their hearts sinking, their fear turning into awe, for they had seen fleets clash for centuries. They had seen worlds burn, but never had they seen a war end without death. Never had they seen power used to silence instead of destroy. The third minute came, the final strike of silence, and the last fleet fell dark, the last weapon dimmed, the last scream of battle faded. The sky that had burned with fire now drifted quiet and still, millions of ships floating helpless, powerless, but alive, the stars shining calm once more as though the war had never been, and in the center of it all drifted the human craft, small, steady, unmoved, the shadow of peace among the wreck of pride. The chamber shook with silence too, no voices now, no cries of war, only heavy breath and pounding hearts. The leaders stared at the sky, unable to speak, unable to deny. The war they had sworn would last another century had ended in 3 minutes, ended not with fleets or fire, but with one human bodyguard, a single figure who had walked into the storm and silenced it without blood, without conquest, without hatred, only with strength too deep to deny. The diplomat finally rose, his voice breaking the silence, steady though soft. He said the truth was now clear. Humanity did not seek conquest. Humanity did not come to burn. They came to end the fire, to hold the storm, to bring a new order of peace where none had stood before, and no one dared to answer, no one dared to deny, for the truth was written in the stars outside, written in the silence of fleets that no longer roared. The human returned then, stepping from the craft as if nothing had happened, calm and silent, his eyes unshaken, his body untouched, and he stood once more beside the diplomat, waiting, watching, steady as stone, and every leader lowered their head, their pride broken, their fear humbled, their voices small, for they knew the truth. The war was over, ended not by fleets, not by fire, but by one human in 3 minutes. The stars were calm again. Fleets once ready to burn entire worlds now drifted helpless like broken giants, weapons dark, shields gone, voices quiet, and in the center of this silence one human stood beside the diplomat, small and still yet heavier than the weight of every army combined. For the galaxy had seen what no one believed, that war could be ended in 3 minutes without death, without fire, without victory or defeat. Only silence. The chamber of leaders was filled with fear and awe. No one spoke, no one dared to move, their faces pale, their hands trembling, their pride shattered, for they had shouted, they had threatened, they had demanded war, and yet a single human had walked into the storm and turned their endless fleets into powerless shadows, and now they sat like children before a teacher, waiting to be told what came next. The diplomat rose slowly, his cloak heavy, his voice steady though his heart trembled, and he spoke words that shook the chamber more than any weapon. He said the truth was clear. The galaxy had lived too long in endless war, too long in blood, too long in hate, and now that must end. No one dared argue, no one dared laugh, for their fleets hung silent outside, proof that strength no longer belonged to them, proof that pride was nothing before the calm weight of one human. The human bodyguard stood without words, silent as stone, his eyes moving across the chamber, and wherever his gaze touched the leaders turned their heads down, unable to meet his eyes, unable to challenge, unable to forget the 3 minutes when their fleets had fallen like dust, and the silence pressed upon them heavier than any chain, heavier than any prison, for they knew they could never again pretend humans were weak, never again pretend humanity was small. Some leaders whispered to themselves, asking if humanity would now conquer, asking if Earth would demand tribute, asking if humans would become the new empire of the stars, and fear grew again, for no one could stop them if they wished, no one could fight them, no one could resist. Yet the diplomat raised his hand and said no, humanity did not come for conquest, humanity did not come for thrones or crowns. Humanity came for peace, but peace protected by strength, peace enforced if needed, peace unbroken. The words spread through the chamber like fire through dry grass. Every leader listened, every soldier leaned close to their channels, every citizen across the stars waited, and the diplomat said a new order must rise, an order where war ends, an order where fleets are not built to destroy but to guard, an order where every world may live without fear, and the humans stood behind him silent yet stronger than any army, a reminder that refusal was not an option. The council argued still, though their voices shook. Some said peace was impossible, some said the old ways could not die, some said they would rather burn than kneel, but the diplomat only raised his hand toward the stars where their fleets floated broken and quiet, and silence returned, for none could deny what their own eyes saw, none could pretend victory was possible any more, none could hide behind lies of power. For power had already been revealed, and it did not belong to them. The human took one step forward, and the sound echoed like thunder across the hall. One simple step, yet every heart felt it. One step that silenced even the most stubborn tongue, and the leaders felt their bodies weaken, their pride collapse, their anger fade, for they knew resistance would not only fail, it would vanish, erased in seconds, and so one by one they lowered their heads. One by one they spoke words they had never spoken in centuries, words of surrender, words of peace, words of new beginning. The diplomat declared then that from this day a pact would bind them all. No fleet may rise to burn another world, no army may march to conquer another people, no throne may demand blood for pride. The order of endless war was over, and though many feared, though many doubted, none could refuse, for behind him stood the human bodyguard, silent yet unstoppable, proof that this was not a dream, proof that this was truth carved into the stars themselves. Whispers spread through the galaxy, whispers that turned to tales, tales that turned to legend, of the day one human ended a war in 3 minutes, of the day fleets fell silent without death, of the day leaders bowed their heads not to a conqueror but to peace itself, and children on distant worlds repeated the story with wide eyes, and soldiers who once lived for war laid down their arms in shame, and entire empires restructured their laws overnight, for the truth was too heavy to deny. But alongside awe grew fear, quiet yet strong, for if one human could end fleets in 3 minutes, what could 1,000 do, what could 1,000,000 do, what could all of humanity do if they ever chose conquest? The galaxy wondered, the galaxy whispered, and though peace spread, though silence reigned, though war ended, in every heart there was also fear, respect mixed with dread, love mixed with terror, for they had seen the impossible and knew it could happen again. The human bodyguard did not speak, he did not claim victory, he did not accept praise. He simply stood behind the diplomat as days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, silent, steady, watching, and his presence alone kept the pact unbroken. His memory alone silenced rebellions before they began. His legend alone became the wall that guarded peace. And so humanity became both the most feared and most respected of all species, not through empire, not through blood, but through one act of restraint. Years later, when the galaxy looked back, they no longer measured time by battles, no longer measured history by wars. Instead they marked the era by one human. They called it the dawn of the silent 3 minutes, the day when the endless age of war ended, the day when the new order began, the day when the galaxy learned to fear and honor humanity all at once, for they had brought peace not with crowns or chains, but with strength too deep to resist. The human remained a mystery. No one knew his name, no one knew his origin, no one knew what training or secrets allowed him to do what he had done, and perhaps it was better that way, for a name would have made him small, but as a nameless figure he became myth, a shadow of stone, a story that parents whispered, a lesson that leaders remembered, a ghost that fleets feared, and though he was only one man, he became more than any empire. He became the weight of peace itself. The diplomat spoke less as years passed, for his work was already done, the order had been shaped, the pact held strong, the fleets no longer roared, and though pride still lived, though ambition still burned, no one dared break the silence, no one dared challenge the memory of those 3 minutes, for they knew if one human could end war once, humanity could end it again, and so peace endured. The galaxy would never forget, not in centuries, not in ages, not in the lifetimes of countless worlds, that the war which had lasted generations ended not in fire, not in blood, but in silence, in only 3 minutes, by one human bodyguard who never spoke, who never asked, who never claimed, and yet carried the future of all worlds on his shoulders without bending, without breaking, without fear. And so the new order stood, fragile yet strong, simple yet eternal, born not of victory but of silence, born not of conquest but of restraint, born not of fear but of respect.